Broadcasting live from atop the Rocky Mountains, the crossroads of the West. You are listening to the Liberty Roundtable Radio Talk Show.
By George, it's George Washington's birthday, ladies and gentlemen. Happy to have you along, my fellow Americans. I'm Sam Bushman. Hard-hitting news the networks refuse to use starts now. Dr. Scott Bradley with me, freedomsrisingsun.com. By George, it's General George Washington's birthday, sir, and everybody wants to call it President's Day and dilute the day where folks like Bill Clinton, Barack Hussein, and others get the same celebration as George, and I'm not having it, sir. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Sam. I totally, completely agree. We have polluted and diluted and actually we've diverted a great deal of thought from what we ought to be thinking about. I mean, how far have we fallen from the original first president? You know, that's a pretty I don't know. When you're commemorating all of these also rans and has-beens and lessers and everything like that. It's kind of discouraging. It really is. And then you give Martin Luther King his own day. Now, it's okay if people want to give somebody their own day, but to lump some of the greatest, brilliant leadership minds that have ever walked this earth and play them out with all the other lessers, that's discouraging, you know?
Well, the reason I think that we celebrate General George Washington, I mean, he was the first president of the United States. Now, I know there's some that say, no, there was actually a person before that. I get it. I'm just telling you, the first official president that we recognize is George Washington. And it's not just to celebrate him as a person. Now, don't get me wrong. He's a wonderful person. He was a moral, good, honest, upright, upstanding, true leader of a person. But it was what he did that made him so significant in history. Not only was he the general that allowed America to be free in the first place, but then he transitioned from being in the military to being a, civilian leader, if you will. I know he became commander-in-chief once president, but I'm just saying it's a civilian election kind of a scenario. And the reality to me for George Washington is what he did, what he did in his life. He stepped down from power. He could have seized power, but he chose the opposite. And that's why, to me, no other president has done that, including President Trump. Now, I know President Trump wants to be the greatest president in the world, but he's seizing power, not relinquishing power, not minimizing authority and power. And I get that you need to carry out your responsibility as president, as commander-in-chief if you're commissioned, et cetera. But at the same time, it's that ability to say, hey, I want to be just a citizen. This country, the values, the light on a hill that we're setting up is different from every other nation, from every other person. We're setting a standard here. And it's that standard that we look to say, let's not have people, concentrating power. Let's have people do the opposite. Doctor, isn't that kind of the quintessential? I mean, there's many others, but to me, that's the quintessential difference, right?
Well, there is. He set a very high bar for the presidential office, and he I've got much of his correspondence. And he wanted, and he would write about this, a constitutional government. He wanted to keep it within the limits and bounds that were established. And you're absolutely right. Every time a power literally was thrust upon him. I mean, he was the indispensable man, first in war, first in peace, first in the hearts of his countrymen, as he was eulogized. But that's the thing. He, from his very young age, I mean, he back in 1754, forward. I mean, he was the commander of the Virginia Regiment of the French and Indian War. During that war, 54 to 63, and he really, really was from a very young age a leader, and he held power, and it was constantly thrust upon him. I've got some. In fact, if you're ever interested. Chapter 15 of my book, To Preserve the Nation, is a chapter that's dedicated, if you will, to George Washington. The title of it is George Washington, The Elegant Exercise of Power, a study in the rare, pure exercise of mortal authority. And you got all those aphorisms that are so true. Power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely, Acton said. Defoe said that all men would be tyrants if they could. And he was the antithesis of that. Every time power was directed his way, he tried to deflect it. I've got his personal correspondence that he wrote to his wife when he was first called to be the leader of the whole Continental Army. And he says, I'm not so sure I'm up to this. Now, it's, this is just not fake, shall we say, humility. I mean, by the way, as a side trip, now that you got me started on George Washington, holy cow, he was very self-deprecating in his own personal writings, like to his wife, for example. It wasn't like this is for public consumption, hey, you guys, I'm so humble that I'm going to take this job, kind of thing. I don't know. I don't do a good Bill Clinton. You do, but I don't. But at any rate, he constantly stated those kinds of things. And I think that's one of the reasons that so many historical detractors today oftentimes kind of paint him as a country bumpkin, kind of clumsily going through life and everything like that. He did not seek after power. He returned to his farm every chance he got. And after, when everything was said and done and the peace treaty was signed in Paris and all that, he waited until 1783 to ultimately leave New York and come down to resign his commission and then go back to his farm. But he wanted the Brits to be out of New York before he really they want them on the boats on the way, so to speak, And boy, man alive, he hightailed it down.
The important thing is he wanted to make sure that the new republic was able to truly stand and not the second he leaves get ran over again was the point. So he wanted to make sure that, hey, the new nation was established, that it was in peaceful hands, that it could remain so. And then he said, hey, I've done my due diligence. I've done my part. I've done all that I can, and I want others to do it. Now, he walked a fine line, in my opinion, between being very humble, which I think was genuine on his part, feeling like, hey, I'm not necessarily up to this, or feeling like, hey, nobody should have that much power. But he also was not so self-deprecating that he was just down on himself. He wasn't negative. He didn't have a confidence issue or problem per se, but he realized the magnitude of what he was taking on. He understood that this is above and beyond all mortal men. And I'll do my best to fill in because duty calls. But at the same time, I realized that I'm not even up to this task. And he walked a very fine line, in my opinion, between being truly humble, genuinely humble, but yet not so humble or not so down that he didn't have confidence in himself. He had confidence more in God on his knees, and that God could make of him what he was or who he became more than he could. And he understood that. And that's kind of where I think our leaders currently are lacking. Instead of putting your confidence in God and saying, I'm only up to the task with God's guidance and authority and help, and they kind of think they're up to the task on their own. And they kind of think George understood that uniquely. And I don't see that among the world's leaders anywhere, but here, really.
Rare exercise in mortal authority. I wish there were time to read this letter I've got to his wife, but I don't think we've really got time to do that. But let me just read you a little.
You got time to read a section of it, though. Come on.
Well, let's just. Maybe I can. I'll read the whole chapter if you want me to, but no, I won't. I don't have time. But here's the deal. He was. They tried to make him king. There was a mutiny at Newburgh. They wanted to rebel and throw off the old nation. Oh man, some of his speeches are just eloquent, passionate, loving, a loving father. I mean, so many people today, and probably all through history, have been arrogant. Okay, and I often say there's nothing more embarrassing than arrogance without cause. And this guy's arrogant. It's like, where does he get that? There's nothing to be arrogant about. But Washington could have been arrogant. But here's just a little statement he made about the idea of them making him a king. So he says, no occurrence in the course of the war has given me more painful sensations than your information of there being such ideas exist in the army as you've expressed. And I must view with abhorrence and reprehend with severity. I am much at loss to conceive what part of my conduct could have given encouragement to an address which to me seems big with the greatest mischiefs that can befall my country. If I'm not deceived in the knowledge of myself, you could not have found a person to whom your schemes are more disagreeable. Let me conjure you, then, if you have any regard for your country, concern for yourself or posterity, or respect for me, to banish these thoughts from your mind and never communicate as from yourself or anyone else a sentiment of the like nature. I mean, it's like, how many times can I say no? But they tried to make him king. There was always this thing of thrusting him to the front. And in fact, there was concerns he wouldn't even be at the Constitution Convention. I guess we got to take a break, don't we? We're going to, all these things sneak up on us.
Ladies and gentlemen, Liberty Roundtable Live by George. It is indeed George Washington's birthday, and we'll celebrate no less.
You know where the solution can be found, Mr. President? In churches, in wedding chapels, in maternity wards across the country and around the world. More babies will mean forward-looking adults, the sort we need to tackle long-term, large-scale problems. American babies in particular are likely going to be wealthier, better educated, and more conservation-minded than children raised in still industrializing countries. As economist Tyler Cowen recently wrote, quote, "By having more children, you're making your nation more populous, thus boosting its capacity to solve climate change. The planet does not need for us to think globally and act locally so much as it needs us to think family and act personally. The solution to so many of our problems, at all times and in all places, is to fall in love, get married, and have some kids."
Are you ready to stand up for your community and support your local sheriff? Join the Constitutional Sheriffs and Peace Officers Association and become a vital member of the Sheriff's Citizens Posse. At cspoa.org, we empower citizens like you through weekly webinars, arming you with the knowledge to back your constitutional county sheriff. Together, we can uphold our Constitution and ensure liberty and justice for all. Your community needs you now more than ever.
This is a battle between truth and deceit, a battle between forces that would enslave this country in darkness and between a media that wants to present you with the truth. We are being censored. America's news outlets no longer provide the truth. 90% of news outlets in the United States are controlled by 6 corporations. The mission of the Epoch Times is to chase the truth, to ground all statements in fact.
TheEpochTimes.com. All right, back with you live, ladies and gentlemen. It is indeed George Washington's birthday, in my opinion, a very sacred day, one of my favorite holidays. Sadly, they've turned it into President's Day, pitching it between George and Abraham Lincoln's birthdays, trying to pretend it's President's Day and we're going to celebrate all the presidents. Martin Luther King gets his own day. See, to me, it's a disgrace. The reason that George Washington, receives his own day, in my humble opinion, is because, again, he had the opportunity to be, to take power, to seize power. He chose to reject that every time. And when you read his writings, it was a very humble rejection, but a very forceful rejection at the same time. No, I will not do it. Forget it. How many times do I have to say no? Was the message. But the point is that every time it came his way, the way he writes about it is very humble, is very endearing, in the sense that he basically suggests that no man's worthy of that. If you read exactly what Dr. Bradley just kind of quoted, he's basically saying nobody's up to that task, not even me, nobody. And I think that's really the quintessential point, Doctor.
Actually, it's so much orders of magnitude beyond what we can possibly, elucidate at this point. I've got letter after letter after letter after letter that he wrote, people attempting to thrust upon him any sort of power that came along. But here's what Thomas Jefferson said. Then we can kind of quote some of those letters if you want. But Thomas Jefferson had some pretty high praise in just a few lines. He said, "The moderation and virtue of a single character," that's George Washington, "have probably prevented this revolution from being closed, as most others have been, by the subversion of that liberty it was intended to establish. So Jefferson lays that at his feet. Look, most leaders, Washington at the end of the war found himself the only guy with an army on the continent. You know, it's like, hey, this power feels pretty good. Could have settled on him pretty hard, you know. I kind of like this stuff. And okay, well, why don't we take this army and let's go into New York and let's talk it over about who's going to lead this country, whatever.
Well, and even grandeur, like, you know, hey, God put me here. This is kind of a Donald Trump-esque view. God put me here. I've been saved by grace and God, which I believe people, you know, there's truth to that. God can do those things. But when you start to say that I'm here basically on God's errand, but I'm going to take power to myself, it's kind of like the country song that says, hey, you know, send your money to the Lord, but they give you their address, right? It's kind of like that in a sense where, you know, it's important to realize he understood this uniquely, and others wanted a king, wanted a leader. They think that one man's going to save them. What George understood was, even if George fell for the lie, even if he did a good job as a king, that doesn't mean that would be the case going forward. So you can have a good person that might be humble and kind and good to the citizenry, but it won't last. Eventually, some despot will fill the vacuum. Eventually, it will go off the rails. And so George uniquely understood this, and he rejected it at every turn. And that's why I think that he deserves a day of his own in American history, to understand that humble rejection of power, that willingness to say, I want to go back to my farm and just be a citizen, guys. I want you to understand that it doesn't matter if you pick me or somebody else. It will go south if you pick a person to lord over everyone else. That's not the way of the new republic. That's not the way of the Constitution, with separations of powers vertically and horizontally. That's not the way that we envision this republic going forward, because we understand that, hey, whenever you have a king, whenever you give somebody too much power, it will go off the rails. In fact, it will go off the rails even with all the checks and balances, as we've seen. The answer is a humble, moral people that follow the admonition of George Washington. Just imagine if everybody had the view George did, Dr. Bradley, in the country right now, would have a different view right now.
Well, you talk about the idea of a humble foreign policy and virtue and morality. He mentioned these things constantly: private virtue, public virtue, you know, the idea of a morality that was going to drive his administration personally, as well as the public view of it, the importance of religion and morality in the cause of liberty. All of these things, they had ties back to, you know, the things that really matter. This stuff about accruing power was not on his mind. In fact, there's just to give you an idea, he says, I can truly say I had rather be at Mount Vernon with a friend or two about me than to be attended at the seat of government by the officers of state and representatives of every power in Europe. Or he'd rather just be among his close friends and family. In fact, his trip back after resigning his commission and going back to being at home in time for Christmas in 1783, I mean, that showed how desperately he wanted to get back to normal life. It's astounding how many people were trying to get him to go to this new convention that had been called to meet in Philadelphia in May of 1787. And truly, his nominations, his confirmations to that job and everything else like that by his state, so he was a state delegate from Virginia, he kept saying, no, I'm not interested in going. The fact of the matter was, if he had not been there, it's my opinion, that it would have failed. The people knew that he was no tyrant and that he never would be a tyrant, and they could trust him. It's just the nature of the beast. That's the nature of the man that was there. And even that is reflected in something that he is said to have said. There's some people that were at convention that said he said it, even though it's not in Madison's works. But this is what he said at the beginning of the convention. He says, if to please the people we offer what we ourselves disapprove, how can we afterwards defend our own work? Let us raise the standard to which the wise and the honest can repair. The event is in the hands of God. So he's there saying, hey, you know what? We got to write something that God will approve of, and we got to listen to him. And this idea that we can come kind of force feed this into the nation, whatever we're going to come up with. No. We've got to do something that really is right. And that was what his every turn was. When he showed up at that convention, it was a big sigh of relief, kind of figuratively speaking across the whole nation, that, hey, you know what, this might work, and it would not have worked.
Yeah, we don't know what's going to go down there, but we know if George is involved, it will be humble. It will be God-focused. It reminds me of kind of this idea, in the pre-existence in the Bible and everything else, hey, God had a plan, and Jesus Christ said, send me, the glory be thine, Lord. And Satan said, nah, send me, I'll rock and roll, and I'll take care of everybody, and I get the glory, And George was of the first order, after the Savior, saying, I don't need all the credit. I just want this nation to succeed. And, if we do the things that we know aren't right, expediency, in other words, or for immediacy, we're going to lose the prize. And we need to understand that this is beyond us here today. And we need to make decisions that God would approve of, have the blessings of God on this nation, and we need to make sure that when others fill these seats, so to speak, that they are prevented from gaining power over the rest, that they're prevented from doing these things. I mean, that's really what he was advocating for right there, right?
Absolutely. And here's something he wrote while president. Everybody kept saying, hey, you got to stay there your whole life, man. He resigned after 2 terms. He set the standard. We had another arrogant putz come along in the 30s and 40s that said, hey, I'm too good to leave this place. But at any rate, here's what Washington said. I could have no view, an emphasis in the original, no, underlined, in extending the powers of the executive beyond the limits prescribed by the Constitution. He was constantly trying to keep his... can you imagine the current president saying something like that? I can't. And here's something else. It even shows that in his death, he was humble. How do you prove that? Well, anyway, here's what he wrote. He said, this is his last will and testament, a clause that he was not to be rendered great public oblations at the time of his burial. He said in his last will, and it is my express desire that my corpse may be interred in a private manner without parade or funeral oration. Sorry, George, people are still doing that. But that was his wish. He didn't want, people, beating the band and going up and down the street and all sorts of praises and glory to him. Well, just put me in the tomb. Let me go. And that was his farewell address, a monumental address on limited government. And like I say, I wished every elected official, probably all of us, ought to probably get up in the morning, say our prayers, read our scriptures, read the Constitution, and then read the farewell address and then go about our work. I think if people did that, you'd have a far more constrained, not overreaching national government. Our policies, foreign and domestic, would be humble and allowing people their liberty. There's just so much that's out of order now because we've forgotten that.
When I kind of compared George Washington to other presidents who have seized power, some of them have tried to stay longer than their stint, if you will. Even Trump's trying to figure out how he can have a third term because supposedly he was gypped out of his second one, even though now he already has his second one right now. And we haven't seen a whole lot of great response from it in the first year at least. But I compare it to everything that's being done in modern times. Let me give you an example. Donald Trump now says, hey, we need to deal with this voting thing, right? I'm going to go ahead and force voter ID on the nation. If Congress isn't going to get involved, I'll just do it by executive order. Forget Congress. I'll just do it myself. I mean, it's the right thing to do. It's a good thing to do. It needs to be done. I'm going to do it. The problem that I have with it is he has no authority to do that, first of all. Secondly, to do so violates the whole point George Washington was making. He doesn't have any authority or power to exceed or expand the office of president. And he, meaning George Washington, chose not to do so. Oh, we're Trump of that view. We'll come back and talk about this because an executive order to mandate a federal ID voter registration database? Hold on. You're talking Liberty Roundtable Live.
How would you like to help this program reach more people and earn silver at the same time? Call or text 801-669-2211 for complete details.
Breaking news this hour from Town Hall. I'm Rich Thomason. Trump border czar Tom Homan says that more than 1,000 immigration enforcement agents have now been removed from Minnesota. However, those investigating the storming of a church by anti-ICE agitators remain, along with agents investigating allegations of fraud on a massive scale. Following the progress in Minnesota, Homan tells Face the Nation that he is looking to flood the zone with immigration enforcement in so-called sanctuary jurisdictions. Savannah Guthrie has released a new video as the agonizing search for her mother goes on.
On the night she went missing, Nancy Guthrie's doorbell camera captured footage of a masked man wearing what appeared to be thick black gloves. A few days after her disappearance, detectives came across a glove found in a field near her home. And FBI officials now say it appears to match those seen in the surveillance video. DNA found on the glove has been sent for analysis. Marking 2 weeks since her mother was last seen, Savannah Guthrie issued another heartfelt plea.
I wanted to say to whoever has her or knows where she is that it's never too late.
That report from the BBC's David Willis. Congressional Democrats still not satisfied with the Trump administration's release of the Epstein files. They're clamoring for more following the release of millions of pages. Attorney General Pam Bondi says that all relevant information has been made public. A new week and no progress to report on ending the latest partial government shutdown. This one affects the Department of Homeland Security. TSA agents may be working without pay. The U.S. financial markets are closed for President's Day. The Dow ended higher in trading on Friday. More on these stories, townhall.com.
Hi, it's Mike Gallagher. A lot of us are thinking about taxes, home projects we've been putting off, ways to get ahead financially in 2026. Now's the perfect time to talk to my friends at Fellowship Home Loans. If you want to lower your mortgage payment, they can help you refinance. If you need access to cash for home improvements or to wipe out high-interest debt, their fixed-rate line of credit is one of the best tools out there. Fast approval, predictable rate, and flexibility to use your home's equity wisely. Remember, many people still qualify to skip their next 2 mortgage payments. Imagine starting big projects or paying down debt with 2 months of breathing room. My family and I have used Fellowship personally. I trust these guys. Take control of 2026. Go to fellowshiphomeloans.com/Mike G. fellowshiphomeloans.com/Mike G. fellowshiphomeloans.com/Mike G. or call 800-510-MIKE. That's 800-510-6453. Fellowship Home Loans, mortgage lending by the book.
Nationwide Mortgage Bankers, DBA Fellowship Home Loans, Equal Housing Lender, NMLS number 819382.
Looking for an IT partner that truly understands your needs? Managed IT Services is the answer. We meet with you regularly to discuss your goals and form a tailored technology plan. Our customers have called us a trusted advisor who delivers. When it comes to IT, we do it all. Firewalls, cloud storage, server migration, and more. Say goodbye to long-term contracts and hello to a team that earns your business month after month. Call 801-706-6980 now and let Managed IT Services transform your IT experience.
Have you ever had great honey? No, I mean really good, all-natural, raw honey? Well, now you can, thanks to localhoneyman.com. We can ship out our locally made honey all across the U.S. So don't worry, you won't miss out. Plus, Local Honeyman has so many different flavors, like Utah Wildflower, High Desert Delight, Happy Valley, and Blackberry, just to name a few. So purchase your delicious raw honey today at localhoneyman.com.
The Foundation for Moral Law is a nonprofit legal foundation committed to protecting our unalienable right to publicly acknowledge God. The Foundation for Moral Law exists to restore the knowledge of God in law and government and to acknowledge and defend the truth that man is endowed with rights not by our fellow man, but by God. The Foundation maintains a twofold focus. First, litigation within state and federal courts. Second, education, conducting seminars to teach the necessity and importance of acknowledging God in law and government. How can you help? please make a tax-deductible contribution, allowing foundation attorneys to continue the fight. You may also purchase various foundation products as well at morallaw.org. Located in Montgomery, Alabama, the Foundation for Moral Law is a nonprofit, tax-exempt 501c3 founded by Judge Roy Moore. Please partner with us to achieve this important mission. morallaw.org.
All right, so back with you live, ladies and gentlemen. I've started to take to this idea, Dr. Bradley. Tell me what you think of it. You know, when the President of the United States does what he's supposed to be doing, I say President Trump did this, President Trump did that. When he does things on his own that he has no authority to do, I say Donald did this, Donald did that, Don did this. So Donald right now is trying to say, hey, I'm just going to make, voter ID mandatory for the nation. By executive order. Congress is too busy. They're on vacation. Forget those clowns. I'm going to do it myself. Absolutely the wrong action. Not because whether the point is right or not. I don't think the point's right in the first place. But, I mean, even if it was, you don't have authority to do things you don't have authority to do. And that's one thing that George was very specific about. Doctor?
Well, there's no question about that. Well, let's just read what they said when they wrote it in the Constitution back in the summer of 1787. All legislative powers herein granted shall be vested in a Congress of the United States, which shall consist of a Senate and House of Representatives. Does that sound pretty inclusive? I mean, I guess I just have to ask myself, where is the authority, as you say, for the Donald to arbitrarily, unilaterally, and by his own authority step in and create law for the United States? It just is not there. Now, there's been a lot of presidents that have usurped that. A lot of presidents have gone down a path. I mean, I think Roosevelt gave somewhere over 1,000 executive orders. And there's a lot of guys like during the Clinton administration, one of his administrators said, hey, stroke of the pen, law of the land. Kind of cool. It's not. It's not. That's how freedom is destroyed, when tyrants, by their own volition, choose to be the one that violates the very foundation that they took an oath to uphold. And we just see that about every other nanosecond in this current administration. It's arbitrary, unilateral, and it's destructive of the liberty of the nation.
So where do we go from here, Doctor? I don't know. The only reason I'm spending so much time on this really is when I want to celebrate George Washington's birthday, which I think is really something that we should contemplate bringing back and doing. I don't know if people realize it's not, everybody calls it President's Day. It's a legal holiday, but it's still considered George Washington's birthday. There's no legal term, as far as I understand, President's Day. We just call it that. It's still legally George Washington's birthday. And the reason I spend so much time on this, I want people to really understand the difference of what we're experiencing in our lifetimes. King kind of by precept, by, kind of a faux king idea that we accept in America that somehow that's going to save us or do us right or do us good, compared to the way it ought to be and the way George Washington intended it to be. And the founders understood this, and that's why there's so many checks and balances. That's why there's so many restrictions on the president's power. That's why, he has appropriate power within his lane, so to speak, but why he was told to stay in his lane, and why George Washington realized, look, I don't have authority to go out of my lane, and I'm not doing it. And that's what I really would love President Trump to do. I'd love President Trump just to have a candid, we're about to come up on the, what do they call this thing? The State of the Nation, or whatever you call it, the State of the Union address and everything else. Just imagine if Donald Trump got up there and he said, listen, brothers and sisters, I love you with all of my heart. I really do. But George Washington set the standard, and I want to become just like him. I want to be a humble servant of the people. I want to be a statesman, not a politician. I want to be a leader. And the way I want to lead is I simply realize that I haven't got a lot done in this last year. I've tried to do it the wrong way, and I apologize. I'm so sorry. And what I need Congress to do is step up to the plate, and I need you people to pressure your congressmen and senators to do what they're supposed to do, to act in accordance with the supreme law of the land, to carry out their due diligence based on their oaths of office and their clear delineated authority and power. They've got a lot to do, and they're not doing it. And I shouldn't have tried to make up for what they were doing. I err in that. I shouldn't have done it. What I want to do, though, is tell you that I can't solve everything by myself. I'm just one man. And if you go look at my responsibilities, they're very narrow and defined. Yes, I'm the commander-in-chief. Yes, I have a role to play, but it's very limited in scope. I deal with international to a great degree. The Congress deals with the domestic affairs of the nation. The states deal with the domestic affairs of the nation. There's checks and balances everywhere. And you know what? I'm gonna spend the next year, the second year of my second term, and I'm going to explain to you people, and I'm going to quote liberally from the supreme law of the land. And when somebody wants me to do something outside of my lane that I don't have authority to do, I'm going to just give you chapter and verse of why it ain't going to happen. I'm not going to do it. And when I do things, I'm going to explain to you chapter and verse of why I'm doing it, what authority I have to accomplish it. And really what I want to bring back, if anything, in America is this George Washington-esque viewpoint that I only have limited authority. And I'm here at the service of my people, the people that I love, and the greatest nation. But I want to send a message to the world that you don't have a king in America. And I'm going to send a message to the world that I'm going to stay in my lane. And my job is to educate you on what I should be doing and not be doing. Because I don't want people to think that I'm just derelict in my duty or unwilling to carry out my responsibilities. I'm willing to carry out my responsibilities. But it's way different than you might have been taught over the last, century or more. And so I'm going to set the standard here and now. So the State of the Union is pretty bad, and I'm part of the cause. Sad to say, I apologize for that, folks. You know what? I grew up in a system where, it's hard to learn these things. But I've been studying George Washington's farewell address and his, State of the Union, if you will, equivalents in his day. And I'm telling you that I'm going to do my very best to carry out my responsibility as he did it. Just imagine if you had that kind of leadership. But instead now what we're doing is we're fighting against Donald, saying, no, we don't want a national voter ID. I don't want one, doctor. There's no authority for one. We've gone a couple of 100 years without one, and the problem didn't get caused by not having one, so therefore we don't need one. I mean, can't people think through that like that and say, it isn't about a national ID. We can fix elections at the local and the precinct level and everything else. We don't need to turn everything over to the feds. The feds will just screw it up worse than it already is, doctor.
Well, all of those things are magnificent suggestions. For all of his faults, I'm not going to say Donald Trump. I'm going to say FDR. Okay, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. For all of his faults, he did something that maybe the Donald ought to take a deep breath, step back, and look and see what it takes. And what FDR did was these fireside chats. Okay, he would sit down with the nation. The only thing we have to fear is fear itself. Those kind of things. There was kind of an outreach to the people to bring confidence back to the people. So many presidents in recent times have said, I'm going to be a unifier. The country's going to come together under me. Bravo, Sierra. All we get is further acrimony, further division. Half the nation hates the other half of the nation right now. And the way things have been played, I can get it. I get it. I see that. But the fact of the matter is that if the Donald would take a page, one good thing that FDR did was he would sit down with the people regularly and have these fireside chats. And people could gather around the radio and he could use his time there to reinstill the baseline principles. Trump's, we've talked about this a little bit before, is a populist kind of guy, and he could reach to the people, and I think a lot would listen. But the problem is that the populism very often turns into the despotism of the masses, where you get a big movement going. The voice of the people is so big and bad that everybody kind of bends the knee and goes the way they'd like to see it. Let's get the people focused on the limited government, the checks and balances, the delegation of authority.
The limited government checks and balances was designed to prevent the voice of the people from running amok like a democracy would in the first place, Doctor.
Absolutely.
These are the kind of discussions that Trump needs to have candidly with his people. You know what? Surround yourself with real constitutionalists. Surround yourself with constitutional scholars. Surround yourself with those who are history buffs that understand the real issues of the day and what was done and why. And see the context of the Founding Fathers, the understanding their concerns, their caveats, their understanding all those details is critical to understanding the Constitution. You can read the words, and that's important. And I believe in the words as they are written. Don't get me wrong. But I'm saying understanding why was George so particular about this? Why was Patrick Henry so particular about that? Why did Thomas Jefferson say this? And you begin to understand the whole historical relevance they studied and brought forward into our day and said, look, history repeats itself, either good or bad. And we need to make sure we're on the right side of history. We need to make sure we are a light on a hill. We need to make sure that there's no king but King Jesus. We need to, and understanding that. So the firesides that you speak of that Trump could do, I think he could educate. He could say, listen, I've been studying the Constitution big time. You know what? I spend the first hour of every day studying the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, the Bill of Rights, the Ten Commandments, all the things that really made America what it once was. My goal is to bring that back. And the only way I can do it is to do what our founders did, because they created something so unique that the nation was a light on a hill. I want to make America great again. The only way to make America great again is to sing How Great Thou Art, figuratively, for the nation, and turn to God Almighty and say, hey, you know what? There is no king. We don't have anybody that has too much power. And guys, I'm sorry we haven't been able to accomplish a lot. Congress, they've been taught to be on recess all the time. Got to stop that. But they have a responsibility, and I just can't take over their job. I don't have authority. It would be wrong for me to do so, and it would set a bad precedent for the nation, ladies and gentlemen. When we get back, let's let Dr. Bradley respond to this. I'm just telling you right now, there are opportunities. There's windows of opportunity. We're bringing one up right now. We don't need a national voter ID. We need good, honest statesmen. You're listening to Liberty Roundtable Live.
As you are aware, America is divided over every fault line possible. This is intentionally fostered by those who do not love God, family, or country. We believe a peaceful future as a free people absolutely depends on civility. Clarion Call for Civility is looking for funding and volunteers at every level to make our hopes and efforts a reality. Please donate, sign our pledge, and help us in our sacred cause. Please visit callforcivility.com for more details. Callforcivility.com.
Bypass the mainstream narrative with Liberty News Radio at libertynewsradio.com. Engage with charismatic hosts live or on demand. We cover the crucial news focused on God, family, and country. News that other networks simply refuse to use. Think of LNR's hard-hitting news and podcast at your fingertips, anytime, anywhere. Join us at libertynewsradio.com. Empower your day with the truth, because the truth will set you free. libertynewsradio.com.
I'm Dave. I'm 7 years old. I'm sitting here in the corner having a time out until Mom comes to talk to me. All I did was cut my sister's hair. I was just trying to help. I guess Mom didn't like how I did it. In a minute, she'll be back and ask me if I know what I did was wrong. Maybe I shouldn't have cut her hair. And she'll say we all make mistakes because we're just learning about stuff. And she'll give me a hug and we'll end up talking about more stuff.
No matter what you talk to your kids about, love is what they'll hear.
I really like Mom's timeouts, and I think she likes them too. Yeah, I think they help her remember how much she loves me.
A thought from the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Visit us at Mormon.org.
About George Washington's birthday, and the man, the leader, his indispensable condition to the nation. And before the break, Sam was talking about, couldn't we have this little fireside chat, a moment of humility, maybe a whole administration of humility, but let's just talk for a minute about, the people are clamoring, did we do this? So we've got to do this, it's essential. And of course, everything we do is a frantic, kind of hyperventilating kind of movement. But I'll just give you an example of something that happened when everybody, I think almost without exception across the nation, would have applauded Thomas Jefferson violating the Constitution. And I hearken back to something that happened in Jefferson's administration. It happened in 1807. The British warship Leopard attacked the USS Chesapeake off the coast of Virginia. They were searching for deserters. And there's everybody's idea was an act of war. One of their warships attacked one of our warships, literally. We heave to, kind of thing, and boarded and all this kind of garbage. And everybody was mattered and hops. We were ready to go to war, and everybody was beating the war drums. And it was just an outcry among the nation. We can't let those redcoats get their way with us, blah, 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 blah. And Jefferson did something very characteristic of the Founding Fathers era. It wasn't in his bailiwick. He could take defensive action, which he did. He protected against other violations and an offense that might happen to harm the United States. He gathered the information. He says, it's not my job to take this nation to war. He said, I'll get Congress back. We'll present everything to them that we have discovered, and Congress has got to decide if we're going to go to war. Now, it would have been a really bad time to go to war, honestly. We were so ill prepared. We weren't ready for the war that came 5 years later. But the fact of the matter is that's exactly what he did. Cooler heads prevailed. You know, when you look about just wars, for example, one of the things is, you know, that moral justice in doing it, but it's also, can we win it? And a lot of times people make their decisions solely and only upon that. You know, I've told the story maybe perhaps on this program before about a friend of mine that there's many angles we could play, but he was a German. He fought on the Eastern Front during the whole of World War II, and he was there in the grittiest of all battles. And I asked him one time, I says, Herb, how did you feel? Because we'd been talking about the depredations of war, the horrific, the slaughter, the over-the-top kind of destruction and death and everything. And I says, Herb, how did you feel about this thing? I mean, here's a war that Germany started, and you're in the foot of it, you know, everything. And he said, it was wonderful. It was wonderful. And I said, wonderful? Why? With all of the things we've been talking about? He says, well, we were winning. And a lot of people equate right with might. And if, in fact, they were winning, it was totally okay. And oddly enough, in that same conversation, I asked him about how can we avoid these kind of problems in the future? And what he said reflected the Führer principle that he had been raised with. He was 11 years old when Hitler came to power in 1933. And he was in the Hitler youth groups and everything. And he said, we must follow our leaders. It was a complete perversion of what the Americanist philosophy was from the very beginning. And so here we have the antithesis. Here's Jefferson saying, no, it's not my job to take us to war. I mean, read the 69th Federalist Papers, for sure. When we get off the air, go pick it up, read it. It is the limits and bounds of the president in exercising the war powers of this nation. Okay, so we have Trump pulling the trigger every chance he gets. He's taken on more of an aura of Lindsey Graham or the late John McCain, instead of this concept of the Prince of Peace that the Founding Fathers were promoting. And that's the way Jefferson handled it. And Washington did so many things that way too when he was in his administration. There was a humility in the foreign policy, and there was an attempt to keep his actions within the limits and bounds of the Constitution. But today, that has all been thrown overboard, taking the hijackings of oil tankers and blowing up of so-called drug runners and so on and so forth, alleged, I should say. We're going to go bomb Iran again if we get a chance. We've got a massive carrier strike group forces just off the coast of Iran. I mean, and we're tamping that down for another foreign power. Holy Hannah. We have lost our collective minds on the limits and bounds of government, and Donald Trump doesn't think there's any limit on his power. So, yeah, we could use a little humble pie.
He thinks the only limit on his power is the limit he provides himself. And sadly, that's the state of affairs that we find ourselves in today. And we point to a greater cause, ladies and gentlemen. We point to God Almighty as the author of our liberty and all men on earth as mortal servants of King Jesus. That we understand our liberty comes from God Almighty, the author of our liberty, and that we must serve him. And in order for us to be a light on a hill, we need to make sure no man, no group takes too much power, that they don't take power into themselves. And so power was divided and divided and divided again by the Founding Fathers intentionally. And just imagine if, like Jefferson, President Trump were to say, listen, you know, I believe we've got some problems around the world, and I think we need to take some action or this or that or whatever he thinks. But we need to go to Congress to obtain authority. And you know what? I explained to you, my fellow Americans, the issue at hand, and I invite you to talk to your congressman and senator to give me the support necessary for what needs to happen or whatever. Hey, I'm fine with that kind of an education and positioning. The president can advocate what he wants to advocate for. He has every right to do that before the public. What he doesn't have the right to do is take power unto himself, and that's what's happening. I reject this voter ID, Dr. Bradley. 100% reject it. We don't need a national voter ID. That's the last thing we need to solve elections. All they'll do is run it off the rails and just laden it down. Pretty soon it'll be like the IRS code. The voting code will be as complicated as the IRS code. Nobody will understand it. Everybody will fear it. It's just a disaster in the making. Anyway, enough on that, but we pray that you read the Federalist Papers, Anti-Federalist Papers, that you read George Washington's farewell address. You study the Jefferson kind of idea about a humble foreign policy. And there's so much to learn about America, and we really want to help people believe in that. I got good news before the end of the hour. Those Senators Rand Paul and Mike Lee are both in the news. Why? Because they're putting a bill out. They got a bill now. It's Senate Bill, 5853, I think it is.
No, it's 3853.
Oh, 3853. There you go. 3853. Right. Yeah. All right. Sorry about that. 3853. And that bill is designed to rein in this idea that the vaccine companies have no liability for any of their actions. Basically, 1986, Reagan and company put a government edict or mandate, whatever you want to call it, that, hey, the taxpayers will pay all the things that go wrong with vaccines. There'll be no liability for the vaccine companies. It's been a reign of terror ever since. And now Rand Paul and Mike Lee are trying to get rid of that so that, hey, vaccine makers, when they do wrong, can be sued, as they should be. Just like any other industry, we need to leave it to the free market. And, hey, if they get sued a lot, there must be just reason that they're being sued a lot. And, hey, judges can get facts and adjudicate transparently and everything else. And I don't know how well this bill will do. I think most will reject it, so I don't know that it'll go anywhere. But at least people are standing up for what's right, Doctor.
Well, this is truly a wonderful thing with Lee and Paul putting this forward. Now, I have not, I'll look up at some point, we're almost out of time, how many co-sponsors they got. My guess is it's virtually zero. And the absolute travesty that we've allowed to develop in this nation because of that, the lies that were told, the deception that happened in 1986 when it was passed by Congress and signed by Reagan, what a massive mistake. And basically, if your child is injured with a vaccine, you are pitted against the entire power of the United States to try and convince them that somebody, the United States taxpayer, ought to pay. And it's absolutely a travesty. This is all hands on deck. Let's get this passed, and let's see what we can. It's maybe get rid of the Federal Reserve is pretty important too, but there's a lot of good important things we need to do, recognizing we've overstepped bounds for so many decades now. And
this is where Donald Trump should jump aboard along with these senators and help push this bill and explain this is bad for the country. This needs to stop. And I, as president, encourage you to, senators to jump aboard, become co-sponsors for the House and, everybody else. I'll sign this bill. He could send a lot of signals in support if he just would, Doctor.
Absolutely. And this is where the leadership of the president should come in. By the way, you said something moments ago, and we got to talk quickly, about Donald only puts limits on himself. That sounds just suspiciously like the leader principle, the Führer principle of the Nazi regime. The National German Workers' Party stated that the power of the chief executive, and this is quoting right from their handbook, is not limited by checks and controls by special autonomous bodies or individual rights, but is free and independent, all-inclusive, and unlimited. He is responsible only to his conscience and the people. That sounds exactly like what you just said. Donald Trump is saying, hey, I've got limits I put on myself. I'm a lord unto myself. This is the wrong way. This sounds more like Nazi Germany. That was, by the way, out of the 1940 edition, in case anybody's looking it up.
But the good news is, ladies and gentlemen, there is a legacy of liberty, and it's in their founders and their documents and what they stood for. They were far from perfect human beings, but they understood no king but King Jesus. They understood the checks and balances. We need to not seek for power. We need to seek to pull it down. George Washington's birthday. What a celebration. I hope you celebrate the whole day and spend time to learn about what he stood for and why and how we can be like him in our day, carrying forth their legacy of liberty. Thanks so much, Dr. Scott Bradley, freedomsrisingsun.com. is his website. We are syndicated by the Loving Liberty Network. LovingLiberty.net. Spread the word, share the love, and God save the Republic of the United States of America.